Welcome, friends. David here. Hope you're doing well wherever you're at. Can't complain myself. It's pretty nice here. Feeling a little bit like a gremlin. Haven't shut the shades out and hide in the darkness to talk to all of y'all, but happy to do it. As always, I really love doing these Griscom streams. Stoked to see some friends in the chat too. What's up, Jacob? Y'all know Jacob from all the excellent work they do in Bama. I was on their program recently. Y'all should definitely check that out if you haven't. The Value Labor Report. But folks, yeah, I'm game to sort of chat on a few different topics. I have some like pretty wild, a weird story from here in Texas that maybe I'll get into in a little bit. We did a bit of a monster show on Tuesday night. I think we covered a lot of ground. I'm always happy to sort of jump back into some of these larger strategic questions and things of that nature in the wake of Bernie, lining up behind Biden, along with a lot of other progressives. But we can chat about a bunch of different topics. I see there's already a few questions in here, so might as well get started. As always, folks, feel free to jump in the chat with questions. We do appreciate super chats, but try to make sure that we're able to answer at least a good amount of questions from everybody. John O'Boyle says, "Hey Griscom, big fan. Thank you so much. In the event of a Trump defeat in 2024, will the Republicans become more moderate, split as a party, or retain Trumpism with DeSantis as leader in 28?" Well, the thing about DeSantis that I think is sort of important to remember is like, why now? Why is DeSantis doing this? And it's because he's sort of done, after this next. So like, he just won his governorship in Florida, and he's out of that position after that. So this is sort of his last chance to ride that national attention wave that he has now, which is why I think he jumped in earlier than maybe he would have liked to have. So DeSantis, I think is cratering pretty badly right now. I think that a lot of the worries that he was going to be able to beat Trump were a little premature. I mean, we'll still see. He still hasn't, as he said in Japan recently, and shook his head like a psychopath. Is not a candidate officially yet, but he's going to launch his campaign. He has an exploratory committee and all that. It's just a formality. But like I do wonder if like DeSantis will be able to carry on that torch post Trump, just because in the course of these next few months, I mean, Trump is going to make Ron DeSantis enemy number one of the Trump movement. Like, this is not going to be a kind of nice, oh, we disagree on some things. I mean, Trump is going to do scorch earth, as is Trump's politics. So will DeSantis be able to inherit the Trump movement? I don't want to make too bold of a prediction right now, just because we don't know what that campaign is going to look like, but we have a sense of what it's feeling like right now. I don't know if DeSantis will be in the position to inherit that inherit that movement. But to your question, like assuming that Trump loses in 2024, which at this point I think you should never underestimate Trump in that movement. Frankly, it's an unfortunate fact, but I think that if don't be too quick to think that that's not a real threat or possibility. What direction do I think the Republicans are going to take? Well, I mean, I don't see much of a lane right now for more moderate Republican to sort of be the person who inherits and benefits from this. Because remember, like, Trump is Trump, far from being an aberration, while he's like unique in style, in substance, I mean, Trump is just Republican politics without the kind of quiet part. Trump just says it out loud. And you're seeing across the country right now, I think that the Republican Party is only getting more and more extreme in their policies, and that's what's winning for people in the Republican Party. And like all of these new iterations, like I think Masters was a good example in Arizona about like some of these other groups that are trying to inherit the Trump movement, the more like teal backed kind of weird slimy characters. Apart from Vance, I don't know if those people are as connected to the base as they might, um, claim or want. Like the thing about the Trump movement is that like it very much is like a Trump movement, first and foremost. So, in the absence of Trump, which direction will it go? I mean, I think that it's going to be a pretty open question. I think that like a good way to sort of look at that is what's happening with the Republican Party in the state of Texas, where for example, Greg Abbott had challengers almost exclusively for the right when he ran for reelection in the GOP governor's primary here. And it was all challenges from the right. And, Abbott doesn't run a moderate campaign against them. He tries to say that he's the one who actually has the experience to get these things done. So I think that more likely than not, this more rightward turn, or even just more like openness about what it is that they're trying to do that we're seeing from the Republican Party. I think that might, in the absence of Trump, that might, will probably continue. But Lord, I mean, like, I Matt and I were joking about this the other day. Like, I think there could be a good chance that, like, for example, if Trump loses again in 24, that he comes again in 28, and we just sort of have this perpetual cycle of Trump trying to reconstitute himself, trying to put the lightning back in the bottle of 2016. As long as he's able to. So I wouldn't be too quick to think this is going to go away. And I think until that movement is defeated politically, in the sense that, like Joe Biden defeated Trump in 2020, but they didn't beat the Trump movement, right? Basically, it was a kind of consensus of a lot of different kind of disparate groups, without really building like a strong political alternative or something that was mobilizing. It was very much like a negative campaign, in the sense that like Trump's bad, we have to stop Trump, which has been pretty much the strategy from both the Democrats and even, I think, from a lot of the Republicans in 2016, for example. And I think that that's going to be an argument that we're going to get in some form or the other from a DeSantis. I think until the Trump movement is like soundly defeated politically, and not just again like them losing elections, but like actually that like the mobilization that sort of occurred around Trump is demobilized, because people are sort of coalescing against a different kind of politics that promises more for people. I don't think that the Trump movement will go away. And I think that right now the big question, if you're a Republican, is trying to figure out who is going to be set to benefit the most from that, not even just on the presidential stage, but like who can channel those into state level victories. And you see it here that like the Texas GOP is completely subservient to Donald Trump. Well, awesome. Yeah, again, folks, for folks just joining us, we're doing this is a Q&A stream, so jump in with your questions. I'll be answering a few of those and hanging out. Secret Asian Dan says, "Hey Dave, what conditions would has made you reconsider the labor theory of value to adjust for conditions that have changed since Marx's time?" Well, I mean, a few things like labor theory of value. Remember that that's not Marx's creation. That's something that is sort of inherited from bourgeois economists at the time. I think that the general tenets of Marxism are very applicable to today. Like, I mean, like, you know, gig work. What is gig work? Gig work is already existing, like talking about Uber and things like that, already existing economic activity. But how can we get around? How can we use technology not to innovate the space as much as to get around labor regulations and rules that were already in place, and put more and more of the costs of doing business on the worker, right? Because that's effectively what Uber does, is it gets around certain requirements for drivers, certain kind of regulations, because it's in different technology that government regulators sort of acted like they didn't know what was happening. And we had Vina Dubal on the show a few months back to talk more specifically about that, and people should check out that interview and her work in general. She's wonderful. But all that is like a reconstituting, like a reformation of the class struggle, right? Like the economic engine there, the model of exploitation there is pretty pretty similar. Like the changes here aren't like they're significant. They cause a lot of harm. They do a lot of damage. They're rapid. But it's not like the logic of capital has like shifted dramatically. I'm not somebody who thinks that there's no criticism to be made of the labor theory of value, but I think that sometimes there's an over focus in some of the more academic debates on labor theory of value by both critics of Marx and also, of um, what is it, the value theory people. But I'd be open to having more conversations about that with folks in the future if that's something that you're interested in, or if you have anything else you'd like to add. And Jacob, again, people should be watching the Value Labor Report if you aren't already. But Jacob says, I think I'm going to talk about unions jumping in to endorse so quickly on the show Saturday. Not happy about it, nor should you be. I mean, like, I think that, the speed at which everybody is endorsing Biden, I think is really disappointing. I don't think it's shocking. I can even, like, if I'm trying to be as like cynical as possible, understand, some of the rationale of like, it probably is would I think it's very unlikely, and we're seeing that's not the case. That is the case now, that like we were going to see major labor unions endorsing like a Marion Williamson against Biden. Just doesn't seem like the mobilization or the motivation is there for that at this time. I still think that like the way that a lot of people in the media are treating Marion Williamson as like a kook, or things like that is contemptible. I think that a lot of the things that she says are good and correct. And I'm happy to see that she's running, and I will challenge anyone who says that she shouldn't run, with a lot of passion. But I just don't see that to be the same kind of lightning bolt and mobilizing force as like the Bernie Sanders campaign was. But yeah, no, I mean, like, when it comes to the way that Joe Biden has interacted with organized labor, with the Bernie Sanders movement in the past few years, it's been really disappointing to see what people have been willing to settle for. Um, when it comes to the Sanders movement. And like, I even think that like, I'm not trying to backtrack too much. Like, I even think that it's probably incorrect to sit here and be like, well, if Bernie would have held out for a while, or if these labor unions would have held out for a while, um, they could have maybe got more concessions from Biden. Again, like, Biden has been handed this Democratic primary on a silver platter, right? We know that the Democratic Party isn't interested in doing real primaries in their party. We learned that in 2016. We learned that in 2020. And this is just making it very, very clear again. But again, the message that there is no division, because the point in endorsing immediately, right? What is the message supposed to be? The Democratic Party and the left are unified right now to take on the threat of the far right. And I think that really um, covers up a lot of the real tensions and the real disagreements and the real problems with the current political consensus and the current Democratic Party led by Joe Biden. And, yeah, like, to be able to give the narrative is like everyone's united around Biden right now, I think is really damaging, for trying to build any sense of the alternative. I have to admit, and I don't have very high expectations, just because of the way that a lot of major unions play politics on the national level, that they were going to be breaking from Biden or anything like that. I also didn't have very high expectations, given how Bernie Sanders has been within the Biden administration, during the Biden administration, how close he has been to him on that. But again, like, the whole point of what we're doing, if we don't, for example, like, have a candidate in a certain election, that has that mobilization, that possibility of winning, the point has to be making it very clear to Americans and to working people out there that this ain't it, that this doesn't work for them, and we want to be able to do something different. If you are one of these people who says, like, everyone should sort of, the cliche, right, hold your nose and vote for Democrats. If that is your argument, right, if you think that that's the case, then if you think that that's the case, just strategically, because the far right is such a threat to like American society, to American working people, like, fine, I'm not even having that argument or that discussion right now. But if you think that we can continue on this path, and you hold these criticisms as well, and basically, are fine with them sort of not being aired ever, right? Because early in Biden administration, we can't do it. He's just the president. He's got to fight Manchin. He's got to fight Cinema. Then it's, oh no, we got the midterms coming up. We have to be united. And just a few months later, oh no, we have to all unite around Biden, and sort of make it seem like everything's okay and everyone's happy with the way that things are going. It's a perpetual system of denying the reality that I think a lot of people feel. I know Bernie feels it, and I know a lot of union leaders probably feel it too. So yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to hearing your conversation on Saturday, friend. Tony asks, I don't know the best edition of Mao's on contradiction and practice. I know Verso is the one I have put out, like a one. I can't remember who even did the intro to that, but those series, Verso, I don't know what they're called, but Verso has that series where they have like some stuff by Fidel. They did some things by Lenin, that I think are usually a pretty good place to start. At least that people smarter than me are finding those to be decent translations. But I'm curious if anyone has any suggestions there on the best translation. I mean, for me, like my Marx and Lenin suggestion is always to get the Tucker, the Robert C. Tucker Lenin anthology, and the Marx Engels reader, I think, are the best translations that you can get your hands on if you want a physically printed book. Secret Asian dances. Does that mean you don't have to subscribe to the labor theory of value to be a quote orthodox Marxist? And how do you feel about orthodox Marxism? Well, um, I think that, like, Marx does a lot with the labor theory of value. So I think that you need to, like, understand what he's getting at there to understand what Marx is argument. I think that the point in making it that this is something that is imported into Marxism, from bourgeois economists, is not to even deny that, like, it has some veracity or some ability to speak to the truth, but rather to say that, like, sometimes people will be like, well, if there's issues with the labor theory of value, that means fundamentally that um that, like, the crux, the center of Marxism is broken, right? And, like, the point is that, like, this isn't the I think the most critical or crucial or even central aspect of what Marx is writing about in Capital. But again, like, I'm not even as convinced that, like, the labor theory of value, like, doesn't have tremendous amounts of explanatory power. I'm not going to ride or die for it, say that there can't be any criticism of it, but um I'm not as worked up about it as some other people are. The question of orthodox Marxism. I mean, what is orthodox Marxism? That's a hard one to get at. I mean, orthodox Marxism. A lot of people have sort of claimed that, like, their version of Marxism is the one and true one. Probably the most old school Marxist would be somebody like Althusser. Um, and even then, like, like, a lot of people really disagree with Althusser's work. I think Althusser was probably, out of all of the major kind of, like, Marxist theorists in the 20th century, aside from maybe, like, the actual, like, revolutionaries, we're talking about just thinker philosophers, was probably the one who said, here are the parameters that we're going to work in, and I'm going to stick to those very, very, with a high level of fidelity. So when I hear orthodox Marxism, that's probably who I think about, which might not be who you're talking about there. Yeah, we got some good questions today. I appreciate these, and, again, folks, feel free. I mean, I'm happy to answer these strategic and Marx questions. I'm also happy to talk about most other kind of things too. So don't think just because we've been talking about this stuff at the beginning means something's off topic. It's pretty much fair game. Um, Emmy, appreciate the chat. Always love hearing from you. Emmy says, without Bernie running this year, how do we hold Biden's feet to the fire on leftist issues and get him to make solid campaign promises, etc.? I mean, I don't think that you're going to be able to get Biden to make solid campaign promises. Like, I don't mean that to be demoralizing or demobilizing, but, like, I mean, the thing about, like, the tenor of the conversation uh, when it was Bernie Biden, like towards the end of 2020, and like there could have been like all these people were saying like, look, there's not even that much of a difference between Bernie and Biden because Biden's saying this, and yeah, he doesn't like Medicare for all, but he has this option for healthcare that like is going to deal with all of this and blah blah. And like, look what happens when he's in office, right? Like, I find for the most part, when it comes to Democratic Party primaries, like I take almost all the shit that they're saying with a grain of salt. I mean, like, Harris and all these. I remember there was a time when everybody was saying they were for Medicare for all, and then they all turned against Bernie. Apart from Biden, like the vast majority of those Democratic Party primary candidates were saying in some form or the other, right? There was always like a little door or window or an opening for the private market, which we criticized and pointed out then. But you notice like they're really good at doing that kind of thing where, oh yeah, we know we're talking to the base, so we're going to like make all these concessions to the left during the primary to sort of get them to maybe come around us as the more reasonable and less polarizing version of the Bernie Sanders politics. And look, it's meaningless, frankly. So on that level, I don't think that like even thinking about trying to win concessions from Biden on that level in the primary is worth our time. What we have to do, and I know this is at this point is almost repetitive, but like the only thing that you have to do, the only thing that's in front of us right now is having like an actual articulate and mobilized and motivated working class movement that can make these demands and have them listened to, not because of like this beautiful coalition that we've built, right? But because of the sheer power and force and centrality of that movement to any kind of government success. I think like, a different way to think about this, if it helps, is thinking about how like abortion became the law of the land in the United States. Oftentimes, there's this kind of misremembering of history there, where eventually after time, the Supreme Court, through their wisdom, recognized that there should be a right to have an abortion in this country. That's not what happened. There were mass movements all across this country. States across the country were legalizing this for their citizens, the right to an abortion. And it became such a mass movement that the sense was something was going to have to be done about it. And the Supreme Court reacted to that general mobilization in public, right? And that's a very different thing. Like I think understanding American politics as like reflective much more of like actual class dynamics and the way that things are going in the society at large, instead of sort of like interpersonal or individual kind of coming to a certain realization, instead of coming to the realization of how power dynamics are sort of shaping up in the country, because all these people in power, the one person that the people they want to listen to the most are the wealthy, and already politically connected and powerful people in the society. Like that is their default position. When we have gotten any victories for working people, it has come because the working class is mobilized, aggravated, and is out there engaging in politics and fighting. And even in the case where it's not like their avatars, like their movement leaders being the people in power, because that's such a power in society, the state, be it the judiciary, or be it the legislative branch, or be it the executive, has to start giving out some concessions, right? That is the way that things have changed in this country, and that sort of is what is in front of us right now. I think it's important to remember like that's where our roots and power are historically, and that's where we should be putting our focus and attention, because I'm sorry, I really think that because so much of this movement came up around the Bernie Sanders presidential campaigns, that we have a really, really myopic fixation on the presidential campaign as the place where politics gets done. Obviously, like the presidential campaigns are where people feel like they have the most ability to influence things, where there's a lot of conversations that are happening in the media, but also with your friends and family when those things seem to matter, versus in periods where there might not be these big national elections. I get why there's an attraction to it. Like there's a lot more excitement. It's easier for me to talk about a Medicare for all in the context of a presidential primary than it is in the middle of Joe Biden's presidency, right? It's just like, it just seems more open right? So I get why there's this tendency, but again, I think it's really important to recognize the history of this country, and you don't even have to be, American centric. This is like fundamentally almost like a universal um, reality when it comes to politics, is that having a mobilized group of people making demands upon the state either has to deny those and deal with the wrath and the frustration from those people, or acquiesce in some form or the other. And like that is how we have to be thinking about politics, right? There's like a lot of things that like bad tendencies on the left right now, where I think there's an over fixation on presidential politics, and then there's a false binary that people make between what they call electoralism, which like you know um I find to be like a very inaccurate way to describe a certain kind of theory of politics. um because like what is electoralism, right? It's less of a theory or a movement or an idea, as like a particular example of flexing power and organization, and muscle and desires of certain groups of people, and ideally in our context, like in our hopes, like class. So I think that understanding that like we have to be able to be fighting a multi-front war, but they all boil down to the same question: do we have a movement? Do we have a united working class? And how do we get that if we don't? And that's just where we're at this point. And it's tough because it means that we have to be able to think um, with a longer horizon, but that's the only way that we'll be able to build things that are able to win. Um, Nozaku has a question. We've been doing our Marx reading series on the 18th Brumaire. So they asked, do you think that Marx's description of Napoleon III as a farce is an exaggeration in comparison to many of the other French governments in the 1840s and 50s? His reign was notably more populist. Yeah, but then you see the end of democracy, right? They declare an empire. They eradicate those gains, and that's where it becomes a farce, right? That's the point here. And it's because there was this attachment to the bourgeois revolution, which has effectively run its course, and trying to harken back to the early days of the French Revolution, and then to the Napoleon, the big Napoleon, the real the one we know. That movement had completely run its course, and could only be a kind of cheap simulation of it that ended with the destruction of democracy. And like obviously Napoleon the first, creates an empire as well, but it was one that also eradicated significant monarchies and aristocratic and power of and privilege of birth, right? Not necessarily saying that it was a purely radical one, but like in the sense that like that had any progressive bent to it, when it came uh to his relations. No, that was a real step back for that movement. Scott Smith says, "Hey Dave, I'm in school right now, and I'm interested in being an attorney. What would be the best field of law I should enter to help workers in left politics? I'm thinking labor rights attorney. I mean, think your head's in the right place. I also think, um, there's a lot of great work to be done. Even in things like personal injury, right, where you're able to come at directly at corporations and make them pay for the damage that they do to society and the community at large. But I think that's your head's in the right place, and hell yeah, man, let us know how it's going." Okay. Max says, "I just don't think the socialist movement should have anything to do with the Democratic Party. There's no space for working class politics with such an aggressively capitalist party." I mean, I think that's largely true. Um, my only contention is that I don't think I I think it can be done wrong, and we're seeing it being done wrong as we sort of deal with these struggles with elected members of Congress, for example, who call themselves democratic socialists, and at times do the right thing, and at other times make horrible decisions, like, for example, blocking and siding with their Democratic Party members, and blocking the rail strike. My only content, I mean, like, I totally agree. I think that, like, beyond anything, um, like, I don't find it to be inherently incorrect. Like, you look at, like, the power block that's being built up in the New York area with, like, democratic socialists, people who are doing real work that is having benefits for, like, working class New Yorkers. And they're DSA members. They have a real connection with the membership and the organization there in a way that's very different. For example, like we're having on the congressional level, I don't think, for example, running on a Democratic Party ballot line is the problem in and of itself, right? Because, look, what is that? That's just filing, right? That's just what you put on your piece of paper. But I do agree that, like, I think that, like, not enough work has been done to make that distinction clear, and we're seeing the consequences of that being played out very, very clearly. And, like, I've been consistent on this for years, just saying I don't think that, like, in the context of how American politics is set up right now, it is extremely difficult to build a labor party or a workers' party. The attempts in the early 20th century had some successes and then imploded. There was attempts in the 90s by really, really good people who were really connected and had a good vision. Those didn't work. I mean, most people don't know about the American Labor Party. So I totally agree with you on the analysis of the Democratic Party. I don't find it to necessarily be some kind of holy thing when you go and file your paperwork to run as a candidate. You're running in an election, and you put the D by your name. I do find it a problem when you start to enmesh yourself within that party and start acting as a member of that coalition, because that is the correct analysis, is that the Democratic Party is inherently a capitalist party, and at the it doesn't even need to be like the final analysis or the final vote or the big moment will turn its back on working people. So I 100% agree. I think that, like, there is, like, on a theoretical level, there's an opening to just running basically as cynical Democrats, in the sense of, like, we're going to run in this party because they let us on their ballot. That helps us get access to be on the ballot and win elections. Um, and allows us to speak to people and get attention and win office. But no, I totally agree that, like, any kind of real incorporation, anything that goes beyond just a cynical saying, like, we're just doing this because it's open, opportunity that's open to us. I think we're seeing the damage that can be done there pretty clearly, which we've all been. I mean, not all, which I and a lot of people who I think agree with me have been saying from the get go. And I don't know if it was, you know, inability, if it was real structural constraints, if it was a lack of commitment to that idea that created the problem that we're in. But, we're seeing it very clearly. And Antonio on the labor theory value says labor theory value is just a lens. Marxist ideas are expressed in those terms, but not dependent on it being true. I think that's fair. Um, Humpty says, "Hey Dave, what do you think about the unequal exchange concept? Hakeem agrees with it, but it looks like Paul Cockshott seems to dismiss it." I'm gonna have to admit, on off the top of my head, I don't think I'm gonna be able to respond to that. If you have a follow up that can sort of help me set those terms for me so I can understand it better. But I apologize and appreciate the chat, but I don't think I'll be able to give you a satisfactory answer off the fly on that. And I'm not familiar with Hakeem, I have to admit. Is that somebody who does, like, media stuff? I think that if that's who I'm thinking about it is, but I'm not familiar with them in general, I have to admit. I don't understand. MK946 says, asks the question: will the DSA again consolidate any independent left movement to the Democrats in 2024? Um, I mean, I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that. I mean, for example, in 2020, the DSA said there's only one person that they're going to endorse, and that's Bernie Sanders, and that's what they did. They didn't endorse Joe Biden. So, unless the complaint here is that they haven't expelled, members, I'm not exactly sure what you're getting at there. Um, I mean, um, uh, this is older, so I'm not exactly sure what you responded to, but I think this is true. The far right Christo fascists are all pretty serious issues. I absolutely agree, and they've already seized absolute power in numerous states. And yeah, I'm living through them. I mean, the thing is, I think one of the bigger differences too between the right and the left, in relation to like the major parties, even, is that the far right, the evangelical movement, the kind of outwardly bigoted movements, like, are no threat at all to the Republican Party. So their ability to play politics with the Republican Party and the Republican elite, so the Republicans can do what they want, which is, limit democracy, help out major corporations, and just wage a brutal class war on working people. They're very happy to attach that with, all of this other right wing bigotry and real threats to, other real threats to people's lives, right? Like, there's nothing in that's a threat to, like, GOP policy, GOP politics. I think like a fundamental difference that I think, is for people who don't think that it's a problem. For example, that the socialist left has, sort of tried to run candidates in and around the Democratic Party, is that, like democratic socialism is a threat to the Democratic Party, right? In the sense that, this isn't just something that you can sort of tack on to all the other shit they want to do. It's a repudiation of that kind of policy. So there is no real opening, right, beyond like, what it means to be associated with that party. It's just like the opportunity to sort of, do politics with them is not the same that the right has, for example, with the Republican Party, because it's not a threat to the Republican Party of Romney and Bush to, loudly incorporate the silent aspects of the platform from the 90s and the 2000s, or the quiet aspects of the platform, right? It's welcomed, right? It invigorates people. It works for them. The Democratic Party can't do that with the Bernie Sanders movement. That's why they have to sort of push them away, because, if they embrace any of that stuff, it's a direct threat, to the fundamental goal of the Democratic Party, which is to distribute resources, to other very powerful people in American society, right? Not to do things for working people. Yeah, and I mean, I think Nadia's on fire over here. Is just that the far right wants the, Holocaust godless communists like us alongside LGBTQ people. So, it is an existential threat. I mean, I totally agree, and that's why I think also all of the bizarre fantasies right now that, in this disorganized moment, that what the socialist left should be doing is looking to the Republican Party, their media apparatus, and that, and calling them for aid, is the most ludicrous thing ever. Like, listen to what they say about you if you think that is a viable, association to make. What is my favorite political rally that I've ever been to? I mean, I gotta say it's a short list. I mean, right? It's got to be. I've been to. a couple Bernie rallies, and those always were the most exciting and the ones that mobilized and motivated me the most. But for the most part, political rallies are boring as fuck, though, I think. The only thing that made those exciting was the fact of like, oh, I'm in a group of people who all want to see the world be made better, and that gave me a kind of energy. But generally listening to speeches for an hour and a half standing outside, unless it's a pretty day, it's pretty nasty. And if it is a pretty day, I'd rather be doing something else most of the time. I mean, Mexico's an interesting. Nadia also says Mexico seems to have recently broken out of the domination by a duopoly of two near identical right wing parties. Varn just talked about it. Maybe that would be a good example to follow. I mean, I think that there's a lot of things that are very encouraging in Morena, and that almost done. We have um, Kurt on the show pretty regularly to talk about it. I mean, I think that's. I mean, I would much rather be. Having like being able to have the criticisms of AMLO that like maybe a socialist should have within Mexico, while also seeing these like significant victories for working people, the significant expansion of democracy for working people than anything we have right now in the United States. Um, yeah, I'd be curious, to see how much of a model it could be, because a lot of the Morena people are more like left leaning figures in politics, but they're people who've been sort of around for a while, in a way that like I don't even think we have enough of a bench right now, of like experience, politicians and political figures in the same way that like AMLO was able to take advantage of. I think that also like I think we'll have to see what happens post AMLO. I think I'm excited for his successor, and I don't mean this to say that I don't think that like she's going to do a good job at continuing that. Like I think Morena, like one thing that is sort of interesting, and I think that we have to be careful about it, is that like I do think building up more articulate and coordinated left party that are explicitly socialist, explicitly working class, versus the more like big tent strategy. Um, in the conditions that we're at right now in the U.S., where like we have almost no real political representation, where we're very fragmented. Um, I don't know if big tent, even if that can get us some energy and mobilization in the short term, I don't know if that will build up something that is going to be able to be long lasting. But I could be wrong, and like I'm always happy to talk more about Mexico. What's up, Kowalski? All right, let's see, folks. And I'm sorry, I know like I'm like 10 minutes behind y'all in comments, so I'm sorry if people were commenting on what I was saying earlier. Antonio says the Labor Parties of the late 19th century and early 20th century did accomplish quite a few things and forced the creation of the progressive movement and the New Deal. I mean, I totally agree. I mean, you look at some of the early platforms of the Socialist Party. You look at some of the platforms of the People's Party in the 1800s in this country, and you saw that like a lot of those things end up being answered, because those fights motivate and mobilize people. I don't think that that's a model that we should be rejecting. I think that those are great models. The difference between the Socialist Party, led by Eugene Debs, which had its origins in the Farmers Alliance, the Knights of Labor, right? Rural and urban workers coming together out of necessity to fight against the monopoly, like early monopoly capitalism, to fight against a broken financial system, to fight against the devastation that people were experiencing during the robber baron period. That's exactly a model that's worth looking at. The differences, and I think maybe if I'm not being clear about this, The difference between that and now is that, again, when they launched the Socialist Party, they had some semblance of a working class consciousness of like mobilized, motivated, connected, and rooted workers who were the people who were leading those movements, were in them and were growing, right? So it grows out of the Farmers Alliance and the Knights of Labor. It then becomes the People's Party. The People's Party works for a little while. Part of it gets co-opted in the Democratic Party. The more radical, militant, class-rooted, working class aspect of it moved away. They founded the Social Democratic Party, which lasted a very short amount of time before it split. And then the Socialist Party took over and had one of the best, presidential election results we've ever seen in this country, for a working class candidate in Eugene Debs. That came out of the people, right? They came out of a mobilized, motivated, organized, working class, rural proletariat. That's what we're missing right now, and what I think is frustrating is it's like it's not to act like the consciousness and the increase in people identifying themselves as socialists isn't significant. I think it's massively significant. But what our focus should be doing is trying to, around the conditions that we have right now, do the kinds of things that got a rural farmer in Oklahoma to join up with Knights of Labor representatives from major industrial and urban centers, right? And to actually have a class so that, like, when you're trying to organize people in a community or in a region or in a state, they're there already. They're showing up to the meetings. They're mobilized and motivated and wanting to act. That's what we're missing right now. I'm not saying we can't do that. I'm saying that's what we need to do, in fact. But that was the precursor to building up any kind of real Labor Party or Socialist Party in the context of the Socialist Party in American history. And that's across the board, is how these things have happened. And um, that's the work that you can't skip over, no matter how good the rhetorical power of the leaders of a movement are, no matter how committed they are personally, no matter how theoretically um, intelligent they are in their analysis of the current conditions. You can't do mass politics without the people, and people think that we can skip that for some reason. And I'm not saying you're saying that, but that's why I just keep on hearkening back that, like, it has to be looking towards the class versus like different kind of strategies about how we can build the vehicle. You can't build the vehicle until you have the people to go into it, if that makes sense. Matt says, and appreciate the chat so much. And they said, I'm a public defender and have been feeling absolutely dejected by the system. 99% of my clients are desperately poor and addicted to meth, yet these prosecutors will not agree to treatment, just prison. I mean, it's brutal. And thank you for your work, because it's really important. But it's awful to see how defunded that, there's a lot of criticisms you can make about the American system, but like, you know, it's different from how it is in practice, but as a principle, like, I think it's a wonderful thing for the state to say, "Oh, we will provide legal protection for you." It seems like it comes from a different kind of country, frankly, and you can see that in like the actual practice example where public defenders like yourself, and thank you for your work, are overworked in difficult situations, and they have prosecutors who are just out for blood because they know that this is a good opening for either their um, maybe a judicial career or legal career or even a political one, and it's the cost of that is a human one. And thank you for your work. It's tough. I'm sure it's probably hard, but we are also grateful for what you're able to do there. Okay, I'm gonna jump down a little bit, folks. Just because I feel bad because I'm a little bit behind y'all because I was answering those questions. Um, so let me make sure I'm not missing too much. Marcos, the Brazilian, says takes on Lula visiting China and his interview with Amanpour. I have not seen the Amanpour um, interview, particularly his, but also particularly his comments on Ukraine. I mean, like, I think that what Lula has been doing, and I support Lula's advocacy for peace. It's pretty clear, for example, how you know Americans and a lot of Europeans think about other countries when they effectively deny what is like a vastly commonplace perspective, is that this war needs to end, and to get it to end, the United States and the United Kingdom in particular need to start really showing up to the table in a way that they're not. I think that it's a good thing for peace that Lula has been pushing in the way that he has, and I support him with it. On his visit to China, you would know better than me, friend. You'd have to remind me of the title, but I did see they played the one of the songs of the resistance to the military dictatorship when Lula was walking during his state visit, which I thought was really nice. I mean, like, look, yeah, I mean, China is going to play a major world in global politics, and I think that Americans, trying to ratchet up tensions with China and deny other countries their right to be able to deal with other powers is despicable. And as an American, I oppose that. And Humpty, just on their other question again, I'm sorry I wasn't able to answer it live for you, but they said I'll get back to you on future Q&A stream about unequal exchange concept. Hakeem is an Iraqi socialist YouTuber. All right, I'll check them out. I've never seen their stuff before, so I'm happy to. I have to admit to y'all, I don't really watch a lot of other like political YouTube stuff, so I miss a lot of it. I'm probably missing out on some good things. All right, let's see. Um, Bob VP says, "Is there a chance in this moment to get more international solidarity and cooperation?" I mean, I think so. I mean, I think some of the exciting things that we've seen, for example, with the DSA, has been DSA sending delegations to other countries to either work as election observers or just to meet with other left socialist organizations, particularly in the Americas. I think that's a great thing. Um, I think it's in fact, it's not just can we? I think it's sort of something that we desperately need to do. I think we're going to do a big episode on some of the recent labor delegations to Cuba that are actually currently ongoing. I think those are great things. I think that it's important to start to build that connection. In particular, I think, especially for those of us in Texas and the South, but I think just nationally, there needs to be a lot more connection with our friends and comrades in Mexico. And I reckon a decent amount of it is language, but I think there probably is um, you know some bad American habits in the fact that a lot of leftists are pretty oblivious to what's going on in Mexico, and actually building real connections with the labor movement there and the socialist movement there. I think that that's something that's desperately needed. If anything, just to be able to learn and to talk and interact with each other. I think, um, the current setup right now is not working. The Vouch left are attacking Lula over his Ukraine citizens. Well, of course they are, because that's like what they do. I mean, like, that's a group I'm not particularly interested in at this point. You look at them whenever you push them a little bit, and they sound very similar to any kind of typical liberal on these things. And you know, if Lula, who, in addition to what it meant for him being able to defeat the far right in his country politically, and what it means for him being able to fight for working class people in Brazil, If you're basically denying, that Lula should have a major role in these things, and you're mad that he's basically not towing the American line on this kind of thing, I don't know. Doesn't sound like a real internationalist or socialist position to me. Kowalski says, off topic, but Dave, how's the panhandle of Texas doing? I've heard that the groundwater situation is bad, and I was wondering what the Texas plan was to address it. It's rough across the board. I know, like, cotton production's been rough out there too. I don't know what the plan there. I think there, if I recall correctly, are like some attempts to appropriate some money in this current legislative, where the Texas ledge is in session. It only goes in session every 2 years, which means it's like a sprint to try to get basic aspects of government done. But I don't know what the status of that is. And yeah, and we talked about this with Tucker, but then the United States is, in my opinion, 100% drumming up, support for war in China in a way that I think should worry people tremendously. CKL says, "Has anyone seen the Crowder ring video of him emotionally abusing his wife that was pregnant? That was pregnant at the time. He wanted her to do all the chores while she was carrying his twins. I mean, just disgusting. I mean, those guys are so nasty. And I know it's old school and or whatever, but like, I can't. I know we're not supposed to talk like this anymore, but like, as a man, I can't find anything more contemptible than not being able to, take care and care for your wife when she's pregnant with your children like that. It's nasty, nasty stuff, and shows that all of their rhetoric, about being old fashioned and providers and all that kind of shit is bullshit. They're tyrants, and they basically, they don't want to have to even care for their family, let alone people in the rest of society. And they're nasty, nasty people. And it's exactly what you thought it was like too, if you haven't seen it. Tommy, appreciate the super chat. Tommy says, thoughts on the rise of computers, automation tech. We need to invest in public education, pre K through 12 college, but is the goal for all to become engineers? How can low to mid skill workers compete again? Well, I think, there's a couple things here. The first one is that the technology question is only a question and attention under capitalism. Anything in I know this is like dumbass guy thought experiment thing, but like, imagine if we were living in a community on an island with like 20 of us, and one of us figured out a better way to harvest rainwater. That meant that we could use a less labor demanding process to get safe drinking water for us. That would be a good thing. No one would be like, oh, this means I have to, this means I'm going to work less. This means there's a threat to my life. Right. And the only reason that like labor saving technologies feel like a threat to working class people is because the system turns them into a threat. But why does the system turn them into a threat? Because we live in an economy and in a society and under a system, where the people at the top, the people who control the labor process, right, the bosses and the capitalists, um, are anything that is saving your labor time potentially, or maybe lowering the amount of like needed work that goes into it. They respond either by job cuts, or reductions in pay, right? So it becomes a threat, but it's perverse, it's man-made, it's created. And I think that, like, in terms of like general, um, mobilization for people, like, this is a point that people should be hearkening on whenever these automation and technology questions get brought up. um but on automation and tech, I mean, look, don't do I'm not accusing you of this, but like, we have to be very careful how we talk about these things, because a lot of times technology, right, because it's is presented as a kind of like scientific neutral process instead of something that again um is like determined by human society. They naturalize things. So like, for example, like a lot of the deindustrialization that we saw in this country, like the common conception of it is that technology got so good that jobs and plants closed. No, they just moved. They just moved. And did they move to use more high level technology? No, they moved because they were able to take advantage of cheaper labor sources, in Southeast Asia, for example. Um, Right. So it was less that like technology had like made working people obsolete, but rather that a new market opened up for cheaper labor than Americans. Going back to talking about Mexico, we have an entire system in this country where things can be done just 500 feet, south of the Rio Grande, and tremendous amounts of labor that used to be done in the United States is done there. It gets treated as, in terms of taxes and tariffs, as if it is produced in the United States, and yet they don't have to obey American labor laws, and the cost of labor that they would have to pay in an Ohio or in a Michigan. So you have this entire system where it just opens up, a race to the bottom thing, and that's not technology. That's capital moving, production into areas where they can take advantage of and exploit labor at a higher rate, and get cheap labor. So, that's one thing that I think is important. And you're seeing it too, like even in other things. Like think about how many union jobs in manufacturing, in the car industry, in the auto industry right now are moving to the South. They're moving to the South because they can exploit workers more there, because they have less labor protections and lower rates of union, density. So, like, I just think it's important when we talk about these things, because there's always this kind of grand narrative that like the computers and technology is like making working people obsolete. We are nowhere near that. The McDonald's that opened up in Dallas that everyone's talking about all the time, the fully automated McDonald's, it's not fully automated. There are people cooking your food there. Um, and to implement these technologies, you have to have people working on those machines, making sure that they're running correctly, the ordering stuff, right? And yeah, the different what happened there was less that like the jobs were being automated, but rather that the actual labor became obscured, right? There's a trick to it, and I think it's important to be right about this. But in general, I mean, is it better if we can live in a more high tech society that sort of doesn't force people to wreck their bodies, to produce the things that we need in society? Yeah. So how can how can we compete? I mean, I think, on the larger scale, I think it's going to have to come from higher levels of like worker mobilization and orientation. I think there's going to have to be a political aspect, to it as well. And basically, what I'm talking about here is like stronger, unions, so that you can say to these companies, "No, we're not going to let you do that." And having a political arm that says to these major corporations, "You can't just flee. You can't just take the capital out of communities." Right? More than a technology problem, these things are political problems, in my opinion. But I mean, beyond that, I think absolutely let's make public education free, all the way from preschool to higher education. I think that these are all things that are good for people beyond even, just like getting job skills. I think it's good to live in a society where everyone can get an education and be educated, and learn about the world and science and history and literature, and shouldn't be a privilege just for the rich and their kids. And Marco says, my wife was laid off by Amazon some months ago, and yesterday her coworkers there were told Amazon laid off another 9,000 workers, but today they received emails about Amazon stock rising. I mean, that's the perverted nature of our system, and Amazon in particular is really brutal with that. I mean, the turnover at Amazon facilities are out of this world. I mean, the particularly like their package facilities are, they're set up, um to churn through labor. They're not jobs that are set up for people to do in the long term. Amazon, they have to be everywhere. So they just hope that they can they expect and they prefer this kind of churn of workers at their facilities, because it prevents things like unionization, people demanding more. Because if you don't like it, quit is basically the Amazon motto, and it's been good to see challenges, to that lately. Is David a pan-American socialist? Sure. I mean, yeah, I think the working class has no borders, right? Okay, let's see. And Autumn makes this point, which I think is good. We were making this during the show. It's like I get annoyed when people say things like Tucker and Marjorie Taylor Greene are anti-war. They're not. They're only against helping Ukraine because it's diverting away from going to war with China. And there's a lot, yeah, there's a lot of jobs that will be difficult to automate, as Dave from Jamaica says. I'm not sure jobs like roofing can be. I mean, it's to build something that can do that process is extremely difficult. I'm much more afraid of rather than jobs disappearing, people's ability to work a job and demand that their wages go up over time, that they get taken care of, is limited, and that's more the the MO of capitalism. I mean, that's what Uber is, right? The idea is that you have people, they work for Uber for 6 months, they get exploited, they're pissed, and they quit. Not that they get exploited and they unionize and start getting paid fairly for the work that they're doing. Custodial artist says, "Hey Dave, have you seen that Washington State just passed a bill that raises the minimum yearly salary for teachers to $72,000 and the support staff to a minimum of 24 an hour?" That's great news. No, I haven't. So some good news for us today. I appreciate that. We need some sunshine. As Vex the cat says, technology should alleviate labor and suffering and accelerate productivity, innovation, and quality of life. Exactly. And it's a perverted relationship that we have. Um, this is a hmm. I wish I had a good answer for this. I like where your head's at. What's my favorite mythology? I mean, probably the one I would know the best just because I was into it as a kid is the Greek mythology. I find it pretty fun. Okay, seems like there's a fight going on in the chat, so I'm trying to make sure I'm getting to the questions. Well, I wondered this too, Dave. So Dave says, how can Amazon keep this worker churn that they have without running out of people to exploit? Well, I think that it's pretty incredible. I mean, and you look at some of the facilities in Alabama, for example, and you have people who sort of come in and out multiple times, and they only work there for a few months. So I do agree that I think there's a contradiction here, that I wonder how long Amazon is going to be able to run this system before they've basically spent and exhausted their labor force. I think that that's a real um, organizing potential to understand about their model that I think is a direct threat, to their success. And I didn't know this as well from our good friend. I'm assuming. Um, Amazon even has massive turnover among its tech employees. I didn't know that, but I wouldn't be surprised. That's pretty interesting. Okay. All right. I'm sorry. Let me see. Wish we could do something to maybe next time we could do something to make sure I can read the questions before we go, and maybe I'll answer a couple before I have to run. But I got to share this story with y'all because it's crazy. I'm still working on doing some longer write up on some of the things that are happening in the Texas Ledge because it's significant. I mean, it's pretty wild. But there's this story, and it's just too wild not to share with y'all. So, as people probably know, there's always been, a kind of bizarre, marginal, but ever present, murmurings from freaks about Texas having that Texas should secede from the union and making bullshit arguments, which are just factually incorrect at this point, that Texas has some special agreement with the United States that allows it to secede, which, as we learned in the Civil War, it is not allowed. But that doesn't shut up the morons who every once in a while will start trying to do this push to have a vote or a movement for Texas secession, which would, again, just like for all the historical reasons and the social justice reasons and all the reasons that people are horrified by that. Absolutely. But it's also stupid because Texas is a state that has benefited tremendously from its incorporation into the union, from the amount of federal contracts that go into the state, the federal money that goes into the state, and the ability of Texas to be able to poach business from other parts of the country by offering low state or income taxes. If Texas had operate as a government, it would not be able to run the same kind of business policies that it does right now. But that's a whole other thing. We can get into that another time. This shit is just wild. So this happened about a month ago. So there was a bill that was filed in the Texas House by Brian Slayton, who is just a real weirdo Republican troll, frankly, to call for a Texas Independence Referendum Act, or Texit. If passed, it will place a referendum on the ballot during the next general election, allowing the people of Texas to vote on whether or not the state should leave the union. And Jeff Leach, who is another Republican, not have any misunderstandings about who's fighting here. Jeff Leach says the same state representative who here is violating his very oath of office will proudly pledge allegiance to the American flag every day when we commence the Texas legislative session. This ridiculous bill is the very definition of hypocritical and seditious treason, and it is already dead. Right? Correct stance from Mr. Jeff Leach on that question, and you won't hear me agreeing with Jeff Leach too much. Absolutely correct. It is seditious. It is treason. And it is a joke and should be treated as such. Well, the right and the more wild right wing activists flipped the fuck out about Jeff Leach saying again that somebody who says we want to leave this country, we want to secede from this country, claiming that they are being treasonous, right? Which, again, in my opinion, I agree with Jeff Leach. It is treasonous to say you want to leave the United States of America, to pull your state out of the United States of America by definition. They flipped the fuck out about it. And a conservative activist asked him, when he said that, if he's saying that they said, this conservative activist said, like, I support this. Are you calling me treasonous? He says, if you're supporting this, yes. Well, you think it would just end there, be a funny, goofy thing on Twitter. But no, this is from, I think, a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago now. This is in the Texas House, and Jeff Leach.
Is that correct?
I'm actually here. Let me make sure I'm getting this right. Jeff Leach, I believe, is the chair of the House Judiciary Committee, the Texas House. And this is a hearing, where people come and they give testimony that they have to swear is true. This is from testimony just a couple weeks ago.
Is that correct?
I'm actually here as Casey Littlejohn with National Process Service. Jeff Leach, I have a citation here for you out of Parker County. You have 20 days from today to contact Parker County Clerk's office.
All right.
So, if you're not following this,
you got to testify on the bill though, because you signed an affidavit.
Did you register for the bill?
As neutral.
Did you register on this bill?
As a neutral.
Can you sit down, please, in front of the committee? There are criminal penalties associated with what you're registering.
So you can't hear it as well. I wish it came across better in the video, but basically, so what happens here is that representative Jeff Leach, who said that anyone calling for secession is treasonous by definition, is being sued by conservative activists for libel. And quote, their attorney said about the libel, the alleged libel, it's not libel in my opinion, said, I think that her feelings were really hurt by the tweet by Jeff Leach and is defamatory in nature. The most ludicrous bullshit conservative activist lawsuit ever. And again, coming after the Texas Republican Party. Like, let's not forget, right now in Texas, the Republican Party is trying to effectively ban the existence of trans people, continue their war on healthcare and abortion rights, criminalize Chinese citizens and residents of the state of Texas, alongside a whole host that I can't even get into of brutal, disgusting bills. And yet they're fighting and doing spectacle politics because Jeff Leach said secession's out of bounds, right? Pretty amazing. But the thing that's funny about that, and I doubt they won't come after him for this, but you cannot sign up to give testimony under false pretenses like that. That is not allowed. It is insane that they did that. For people who have never been served or aren't familiar with that process, typically what you do is you try to reach them at home. First, then maybe find a workplace that you can reach them at, and then last possible would be to serve them in a public space in this way, right? You only do that if you want to embarrass people, and obviously this is not, in my opinion, a real lawsuit with merits. So of course it's all for the spectacle and the shock value. So they did that during the actual session of the Texas Ledge. Probably one of the most bizarre things, and I've seen a lot of bizarre things in Texas politics in a while. So if anyone's curious how things are going here in the state of Texas, pretty goofy. Yeah, and I'm sorry, the audio isn't that's just the actual recording itself. But all right, folks, we've gone for a little bit. I appreciate everyone. I'm hoping to be able to get some more stuff done on covering some of the Texas Ledge things from a more socialist perspective, because it's pretty wild. It's some dangerous things. Bad Lefties, right? Just shout out in general. Always happy to do it. Big love and solidarity with Zoe Zephyr. We covered that on the program. If you didn't see it, we made the post game public this week. If you didn't catch it, so. So, if you're wanting to, get more of us, if you didn't see the post game, check that out. We talked about Tucker. We talked a little bit about this Bernie Sanders endorsement of Biden. We took people's calls and questions along some other things. So check that out if you missed it. I think we're going to be doing another reading series this weekend. And we'll be back next week, Tuesday, 7 Central. If you're a patron, don't forget to double check your cars and things like that so you don't lose access. And if you're not already signed up, consider joining us so that we can do more of these. I mean, really, would like to be able to expand Left Reckoning a little bit. And the only way we can do that is with your support. So patreon.com/Left Reckoning. I appreciate all of y'all so much. Have a good weekend and take care, friends.